There was no training for this moment. Two American B-17 bombers were locked together in mid-air, both on fire, both bleeding fuel, drifting toward the German coast at 15,000 feet. Inside one cockpit, the controls still responded. Inside the other, both pilots were already dead. Below them, the North Sea waited. Above them, ammunition cooked off in sharp white flashes, punching holes through aluminum skin. Trapped between the two aircraft, a ball turret gunner was praying out loud, knowing no one could reach him and that time was already gone. This was no longer a dogfight. It was no longer a mission. It was a slow, brutal collapse, measured in seconds, heat, and muscle strength. Every decision from this point forward would cost lives. Every mistake would end them all. Nothing that followed existed in any flight manual. There was no checklist, no procedure, no safe outcome. Only two pilots, one impossible aircraft, and a choice that would decide who lived, who died, and why it would be remembered. The 31st of December, 1944. The B-17 flying fortress, called the Little Skipper, was already deep inside German airspace. Engine steady, formation tight, nerves stretched thin. Second Lieutenant Glenn Rojon sat left seat with William Leake beside him, both men watching the sky turn hostile. Black flak bursts rose from the ground like walls, not scattered fire but a ceiling of steel timed to altitude and speed. Ahead, Hamburg burned under smoke markers. Around them, fortresses vanished in pieces, wings torn off, fuselages split, crews spilling into the cold. The order came anyway. Bomb bay doors opened. The aircraft shuddered as 500-pound bombs dropped, each release pulling the plane upward, lighter and more exposed. The flak intensified, closer now, hammering the airframe. There was no choice to slow, no room to evade. The formation turned for home, damaged, incomplete, and suddenly hunted. What mattered now was staying together long enough to survive. Before the formation could settle, the warning came sharp and fast. Bandits, 11 o'clock high. Jet engines screamed past the fortresses as Me, 262 seconds slashed through the line, firing heavy cannons and vanishing before the gunners could track them. Contrails hung like scars in the winter sky. Then the prop fighters followed. Bf 109 seconds attacked head-on, forcing pilots to hold course while tracers stitched the air. W-190 seconds swarmed from the sides, punching holes through wings and engines. To Rojon's right, a battered fortress fell behind, smoke trailing. Its pilot called it in, going down. The crew bailed out at 5,000 feet, parachutes snapping open just above the grey sea. For a moment, hope appeared when P-51 Mustangs tore in, driving the Germans away. The relief lasted seconds. The fighters peeled off to protect other bombers. The fortresses were alone again, slower now, bleeding fuel, and drifting toward open water with gaps in the formation the enemy would soon find. Nothing stood between them and the next attack wave. The next attack shattered the formation center. A Bf-109 came straight in and raked the lead. Fortress, 9 lives, with cannon fire. Bullets tore through the cockpit. Both pilots were killed instantly. No mayday call, no warning. Yet the aircraft did not fall. All 4 engines kept running, holding speed and altitude as if nothing had happened. To the crews behind, 9 lives looked alive, steady, leading them forward. Inside, the controls were locked by lifeless hands, the nose slowly creeping upward. The bomber climbed just enough to drift back into the path of the aircraft behind it. Rojon searched for the lead ship, trying to close the gap. He never saw it coming. Another crew shouted into the radio, screaming, a warning that arrived too late. The sky jolted without sound. Metal screamed. In one violent instant, 2 B-17 seconds became 1. The impact ripped through both aircraft like a collision with the ground. 9 lives slammed down onto the belly of the Little Skipper, its nose punching through aluminum skin, locking the 2 bombers together in a grinding shudder. The controls jerked. The throttles bucked. Rojon was thrown forward as the column fought back in his hands. Leake's knees smashed into the yoke as warning lights flared across the panel. For a split second, the fortress refused to answer at all. Then it did wrong. Heavy, sluggish. Behind them, metal twisted and shrieked as the weight of another airplane dragged them off balance. Fuel streamed. Fire licked along the wing route. The aircraft began to sink, not diving, not flying, just falling forward through cold air at 15,000 feet. Reports flooded the intercom systems alive, hydraulics strained, control barely holding. Rojon leaned out and looked back. Another B-17 was riding on top of them, engines burning, ammunition flashing. They were no longer a bomber. They were a single, crippled machine with 8 engines, 2 fuselages, and no margin left. In the shattered space between the 2 aircraft, the ball turret of the little skipper had been forced upward, crushed into the fuselage of 9 lives. Corporal Joe Russo was still alive inside it. Metal pinned the turret in place, severing power and hydraulics, trapping him beneath burning aluminum. Above him, engines roared, and ammunition detonated in sharp, blinding flashes. Russo reached for the intercom and spoke calmly, his voice cutting through the chaos. He began to pray, not loudly, not in panic, one Hail Mary after another, steady and deliberate. In the waist section, crewmen fought the twisted frame, pulling until their hands bled, but the turret would not move. There was no leverage, no release, only fire spreading across the wing and heat pushing inward. Rojon heard the prayers in his headset and knew what they meant. The aircraft could still fly. Russo could not escape. From this moment on, every second the fortress stayed airborne was borrowed from one man's life. Rojon and Leek planted their boots against the instrument panel and pulled with everything they had. The control column felt welded in place, the weight of another bomber dragging them down. Engine number 1 on 9 lives burned unchecked, flames rolling back along the wing. The heat bled through the skin of the little skipper, pressing against their faces. Rojon tried rocking the aircraft, then shoved the throttles forward, then back, searching for any movement that might tear the planes apart. Nothing worked. The altimeter unwound past 15,000 feet. 14, 13. They were losing altitude, losing time. Below them was the North Sea, certain death for everyone still aboard. Rojon made the decision without debate. He eased the throttles to idle and forced the nose into a slow, grinding turn toward land. Inch by inch, the locked aircraft responded. The German coastline slid into view through smoke and fire. Flak burst again, black and close. Ammunition cooked off in violent bursts around them. The aircraft shuddered, but it kept turning. Against every rule of flight, the impossible machine was coming home. The fire spread faster now, crawling across both wings as 50 caliber ammunition began detonating in violent pops, sending bullets tearing through open air. Rojon keyed the intercom and gave the order no pilot ever wants to give. Prepare to bail out. Jump from the tail. It was the only exit not already consumed by flame. In the waist section, 3 crewmen stayed behind, fighting the jammed turret with bare hands, knowing it would not move. Inside the plexiglass sphere, Joe Russo kept praying. His voice was steady, almost distant, filling the headsets of men who could do nothing but listen. One by one, the crew backed away from the heat, from Russo's voice, from the knowledge they were leaving him behind. They jumped through fire into empty sky. In the cockpit, Leek pulled off his helmet and unplugged his intercom. He would not listen anymore. Silence, he later said, was the only mercy left. The last parachutes vanished below, and the cockpit fell quiet, except for fire and engines tearing themselves apart. Rojon shouted for Leek to bail out. Leek refused. Without both of them on the controls, the aircraft would roll, and no one would escape. They held the column together, muscles shaking, smoke burning their eyes. The ground was rushing up now, faster than thought, faster than prayer. Rojon fought to keep the nose level while Leek braced the yoke with his knees and shoulders, forcing the locked bombers to fly straight for a few more seconds. This was no longer about survival. It was about control. About holding the machine steady long enough to deny chaos its final claim. The coastline flashed beneath them. A German officer below ordered his flak crews to stop firing. He could see what was coming. There was no need to add more death to what gravity was already preparing to finish. The ground filled the windshield in a blur of grey and brown. Rojon held the column with both hands and shouted for the aircraft to stay straight, his voice tearing apart under the noise. The pilots were praying now, not for survival, but for alignment, for one clean angle, one final second of control. The lower aircraft struck first. 9 lives hit the earth and detonated, the explosion punching upward like a hammer. The blast vaulted the little skipper back into the air, weightless for a heartbeat, before gravity reclaimed it. The bomber slammed down belly first, skidding across frozen ground. A wing sheared through a wooden structure, ripping the fuselage open and throwing the nose forward until metal finally stopped screaming. Then there was nothing. No engines, no fire, no voices. Only silence settling over wreckage that should have killed everyone inside. In the broken cockpit, Rojan and Leek looked at each other, stunned. Against every rule of physics and war, they were still alive. Rojan and Leek crawled from the wreckage, through torn aluminum and leaking fuel, their bodies shaking more from shock than injury. Cuts and bruises were all they carried, an outcome no one would have believed possible minutes earlier. Smoke drifted low across the ground. Somewhere behind them, flames consumed what was left of 2 bombers fused into one grave. Leek reached for a cigarette on instinct, hands still trembling, when a rifle muzzle snapped into view inches from his face. A German soldier shouted and pointed at the gasoline pouring from the wing. One spark would end them all. They froze. The war, for them, had stopped mid-motion. They were alive, captured, and standing among wreckage that should not have spared a single soul. Survival did not feel like victory. It felt heavy, undeserved, and unbearably quiet. When the numbers were finally tallied, they felt unreal. 6 men survived from the little skipper. 4 survived from 9 lives. The rest were gone, burned, crushed, or lost to the sea and fire. No celebration followed the count. There was no sense of triumph, no relief that matched the cost. Rojan would later say the figures meant nothing to him. He remembered voices, not totals, faces, not statistics. One man praying in the dark while others lived because he could not escape. Survival, in the end, came with a weight no medal could lift and no report could explain. This story matters because it strips heroism of its noise. It reminds us that real leadership is not loud, not perfect, and rarely rewarded in the moment. It happens when responsibility outweighs fear, when staying is harder than leaving, and when the cost is fully understood. In a world that often celebrates speed, shortcuts, and self-preservation, this story is a warning and a lesson. The decisions that define us are usually made under pressure, without applause, and with consequences we must carry alone. If stories like this still matter to you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. These are the stories worth remembering and passing on.